The window slid open again and the voice spoke to her. "We got the ball, Mom. It's not lost, just a few more." When the window opened once more, this time the ball was there. Catch! There were all kinds of signatures on it, though none he could really recognize except Joe Morgan and Pete Rose.
Welcome to the 16th Annual Story Week Festival of Writers, theme Surviving the American Dream. Presented by the Fiction Department at Columbia College Chicago, the festival takes place at venues throughout Chicago, and all events are free and open to the public. Once again, we are thrilled to welcome an amazing lineup of guests, and we appreciate your participation. I'm going to introduce the host of tonight's event, Achi Obejas. Achi Obejas was born in Cuba and moved to the United States when she was 6 years old. Her most recent books are Ruins, a novel, and This Is What Happened in Our Other Life, a best-selling poetry chapbook. She's the translator of Gino Diaz's The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde from English to Spanish, and Enya Lucia Portella's 100 Bottles from Spanish to English. She was part of the Chicago Tribune Pulitzer Prize-winning team in 2001, which won several Peter Lisagor journalism honors, 2 Lambda Literary Awards, and an NEA Poetry Fellowship. Her articles have appeared in the Washington Post, In These Times, Village Voice, Playboy, Los Angeles Times, Ms., Nerve.com, and others. She is currently the Sor Juana visiting writer at DePaul.
Can you guys hear me? No, I can't, huh? I'm going to have to hold it. I really didn't want to. Well, we're going to start by each of us reading, and then we're going to have a little chat. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. This is from a novel in progress. I'm going to read you 2 sections. The first section is the very beginning of the book, and then the second section is further in, but I need the first section to give you some context. I'm not going to tell you anything else about it. Later, when we're done, you can tell me if you can, since it's a novel in progress, what you think. It'll be helpful to me. The book is called G. Asita Smirnova is a doctor who lives on the slope of a hill overlooking the diamond-shaped bay in G, a small town on the eastern side of an island in an archipelago that spreads into the sea like the Milky Way. Hers is a small wooden house, more like an expanded hut with a couple of stucco walls, with electricity and an inside bathroom. The red roof tiles were affixed by her father, a surprisingly nimble 82-year-old who has amassed a small fortune by local standards from repairing roofs after the last major hurricane. Asita's father climbs up and down the wooden planks like a monkey, quick and effortless. He tells us calmly over coffee that he doesn't know what he'll do with his fortune. The exact amount is a mystery. For now, Asita's father has plenty of work. Nearly every house on the slope has been rebuilt, but down below, where the view of the bay's shape is obscured by proximity, the buildings are in ruins. At one point, it's clear these were better, sturdier, more refined houses than those on the slope, but now they stand like a movie set. Their newly painted facades, bright emerald green with a rust trim, look out on the still churning waters on the other side of the seawall. Behind the pristine walls, rats scurry and chunks of concrete tumble at the whisper of rain. Behind the buildings themselves, a thicket, impassable woods that look like a green velvet curtain. Because Asita's father's work on the red roof tiles has been noticed, he's been hired by regional authorities to lead a team of locals to restore the emerald and rust houses. There's not a single architect or electrician among them, the few from the village having been sent to the capital years ago to refurbish buildings there and construct hotels for tourists. But Asita's father is confident that he has no need for specialists and has begun the project with the middle house, the one whose skeleton is naked to the eye. The houses have been empty for a while now, long before this last hurricane, Asita tells me as we stroll by the remaining walls of the house, in repair on the unpaved path by the seawall. Tiny green shoots line the path, defying the hurricane's devastation. This part of the ocean front is a gathering place for the townsfolk. Some sell oyster shots, some hold hands or simply scratch at their limbs, and some just stare out at the gleaming bay, punctuated by the oxidized nose of a long-ago shipwreck poking out of the water. A native of this fishing village, Asita has finally come home to stay. When she graduated from medical school, she was sent on missions abroad that constantly interrupted her dream of treating the people in her hometown. It's not that there aren't doctors in G. There are, but none are local. They come to do their required residence in the provinces and leave as soon as the 2-year mark arrives. None of them ever choose to settle here. When the doctors fall in love, they always take the lucky villager with them to the capital or abroad. Recently, G has experienced a decrease in the total number of medical personnel because more and more of them are sent to other countries in exchange for goods, whether the physicians like it or not, and because G is isolated and far, its needs are not a priority. During her government service, Asita toured more than 16 countries, treating victims of malaria, malnutrition, parasites, tsunamis, earthquakes, and war. Her last assignment was in K, a nation of 32 atolls and one raised coral island in the central tropics of the Pacific. She left when K's president asked neighboring countries to take in K's citizens, not because of famine or hostilities, but because water levels were rising and the islands were disappearing. To plan for the day when you no longer have a country is indeed painful, but I think we have to do that, he declared. For Asita, this meant a chance to come home to treat her own people. But because the authorities that oversee the medical corps, the National Health Plan, and the appointments to regional and municipal clinics thought her skills would be better appreciated back in medical school, teaching recruits from those 16 countries previously visited. She had, after all, acquired near fluency in 4 languages, could read an additional 2, and make herself understood in 3 others, not to mention the value of her lived experience in helping the new arrivals feel comfortable so far from home. She was forced to quit her official position. And because a private clinic would be outside the law here, her decision to tend to people for free and depend strictly on their charity is something of a sensation, both here and abroad. That's why I'm here, to study her methods, both in treating her patients and in eluding the authorities who frown on any and all such personal initiative. Asita herself has proffered the invitation. So far, I have watched Asita deal only with minor problems, though she has told me about a few scares. A scabies epidemic that killed dozens of people because simple medications weren't available and several villagers went mad and scratched themselves to death. Surgery, using acupuncture in place of anesthesia. A temporary ban on abortions early on in the island's revolution that sent women underground and almost decimated a generation. And most especially, the after effects of the hurricanes, both the physical and the psychological traumas. The hurricanes overwhelm us, she says. There is no way on this green earth that all of the problems that arise after a hurricane can be treated, much less solved. The tropics, my friend, double, triple the intensity of any event. A single puncture wound up north is just that. But here, it's the pathway for 1 million infections, and because we are so poor, we have nothing but luck and pluck to depend on. Economic embargoes, international debt, too many storms, bad faith, hard politics, and doubt about the president keep the island, and thus G, from medical advances. The president's pride does not allow accepting foreign aid, even from allies, even when hurricanes leave thousands dead and in conditions that will inevitably result in thousands more lives lost. Nonetheless, Asita is a fan of the president's commitment to medicine, of his policy of neighborhood and village clinics, of shared resources and his emphasis on prevention. She is a full adherent to his theory of collective interdependence, of the group's welfare being paramount, paradoxically, to guarantee individual well-being and satisfaction. I used to compare us as a society to ants, to bees, but those are incorrect analogies, she says. Ants and bees have highly sophisticated societies with thousands and thousands of members. Their survival depends on those numbers and on a strict organization. They're not really capable of improvising, certainly not regularly. But we are small, limited in numbers and power. Our society, communal but raw, sometimes feared because we choose to be different, demands improvisation and a great deal of sacrifice to deal with everything that comes our way. So we are more like vampire bats. Oh, I know, it's not a pretty picture, but hear me out. Vampire bat colonies are much smaller in numbers than ants or bees, and each member must still hunt on his own in order to stay alive. If a vampire bat doesn't eat, it's dead in less than 3 days, and this has led to the development of a particular way of sharing. If a vampire bat fails to feed on any given night, it will lock mouths with one of the colony's more successful hunters, who will vomit up warm blood for everyone who needs it. It's messy and crude, but it keeps the bat colonies alive. It's an ugly but ultimate way of sharing. I've read many of her articles and seen the videos from her international speeches, but have never heard her use such a disturbing image. In fact, in most of her writing and talks, Asita Smirnova extols the island system in heroic, almost mythological terms. Before coming here, I reviewed her public record to make sure that it was the same Asita Smirnova who now invited me to come document her harassment, to take note of impropriety, of ethical lapses in the course of dispensing medical help. And indeed, this Asita Smirnova, who was for so many years a medical ambassador for her country, is the same Asita Smirnova who now practices outside the system, not because she is against it, but because she feels those running it no longer hold to the high ideals that conceived it. It's the same Asita Smirnova who fears banishment from her profession and takes refuge in her tiny village, treating its residents with a personal bartering system that often results in working for free. It's the same Asita who compares her country to a colony of vampire bats. Thank you. You're here to read.
Yes, I'm going to read. I'm Dagoberto Gilb. Let me say a couple things first. One is I love Chicago, so I'm really glad to be here, and I particularly love this place. I want to rent it. I want to move in. I love Austin, the hipster world of Austin. The Whole Foods is in Austin. It started in Austin, but I'm not close enough. Is that better? Do you hear me better? Anyway, but I miss the streets. I'm from LA, and even El Paso, where I'm from, has streets, and where I live in Austin, it's too hilly and green and too hippie. It's like, oh God, all these hippies are here and they don't get it. But I do see sort of hippies. Are people hippies when they live in cities? I don't know. Been living in Austin too long. Anyway, I want to thank Randy Albers a lot. I know how hard he worked to bring me in, so I'm the easy one. Let's see. Okay, and unfortunately, this story isn't set in Chicago. It's set in Los Angeles, but that's the way it is. And not much I need to say. I will say this just about me, so you know. I kind of been through a little traumatic injury, and so I kind of, the word isn't fuck up, but screw up visually. I'm still going through this. So if I mess up when I'm reading, forgive me, just bear with me. I'm doing the best I can. I noticed that Achi has that. She has a Kindle, I guess, and I'm sort of, I need to do this because, well, long story, but I was thinking I'm going to do this other thing so I get used to reading in a different way. And my old custom of reading is not working as well. So anyway, I'm just bear with me. I'll do my best. This is called Uncle Rock. Oh, just not.
I have them go out if you want it.
No, I want to try, but I have to practice before I do this stuff. One thing about, I'll just talk about this little practical stuff of business, because it is about that time of year. I ran a streak of, I've been published in the New Yorker a few times, but then David Remnick, the new editor, just didn't seem to care for my stuff as much. I know he cared for it, but maybe not as much. And so I went through a streak of I always felt like, the record of being rejected personally by the editor-in-chief. And, it's one of those records nobody would ever know. But I knew I had a record going, and so at the very last minute, a good magazine asked me for a story, and I had just finished this one. I thought, I'll give it to him. Oh, no, I should send it to the New Yorker because, get my rejection there as quickly as possible. And the money is better. And it was one of these things where they took it within 3 days. But it is, much as, of course, it's because the quality is so wonderful. But it also has to do with when I sent it in, it was mid-April. Mid-March. And you'll see why that matters. Because I'll just tell you, it's about baseball. It helped a lot. I'm like, wow, I should learn to gear my stuff to sending it in the right time does matter. It's just one of those things that we refined literary people don't think about. We think that these things don't matter. Anyway, Uncle Rock. In the morning at his favorite restaurant, Eric got to order his favorite American food, sausage and eggs and hash brown papitas fried crunchy on top. He'd be sitting there eating with his mother, not bothering anybody, and life was good when a man started changing it all. Lots of times it was just a man staring too much, but then one would come over. Friendly, he'd put his thick hands on the table as if he were touching water and squat low so that he was at sitting level, as though he were so polite, and he'd smile with coffee and tobacco-stained teeth. He might wear a bolo tie and speak in a drawl, or he might have a tan uniform on, a company logo on the back, an oval name patch on the front. Or he'd be sitting in a nothing special work shirt, white or striped, with a couple of pins clipped onto the left side pocket, tucked into a pair of jeans or chinos that were morning clean still, with a pair of scuffed up work boots that laced up higher than regular shoes. He'd say something about her earrings or her bracelet or her hair or her eyes. And if she had on her white uniform, he'd say how nice it looked on her. Or he might come right out with it and tell her how pretty she was, how he couldn't keep himself from walking up, speaking to her directly, and could they talk again? Then he'd wink at Eric. Such a fine-looking boy. How old is he, 8 or 9? Eric wasn't even small for an 11-year-old. He tightened his jaw then, slanted his eyes up from his plate at his mom, and not the man, definitely not this man he didn't care for. Eric drove a fork into a goopy American egg yolk and bled it into his American potatoes. She wouldn't offer the man Eric's correct age either, saying only that he was growing too fast. She almost always gave the man her number if he was wearing a suit, not a sports coat, but a button suit with a starched white shirt and a pin tie meant something to her. Once in a while, Eric saw one of these men again at the front door of their house, their apartment in the Silver Lake. The man winked at Eric as if they were buddies, grabbed his shoulder or arm, squeezed the muscle against the bone. What did Eric want to be when he grew up? A cop, a jet airline mechanic, a travel agent, a court reporter, a dog groomer? Eric stood there because his mom said he he shouldn't be impolite. His mom's date said he wanted to take Eric along with them sometime, the three of them. What kind of places did Eric think were fun? Eric said nothing. He never said anything when the men were around, and not because of his English, even if that was what his mother implied to explain his silence. He didn't talk to any of the men, and he didn't talk to his mom either. Finally, they took off, and Eric's night was his alone. He raced to the grocery store and bought a half-gallon of chocolate ice cream. When he got back, he turned on the TV, scooted up as close as he could, and ate his dinner with a soup spoon. He was away from all the men. Even though a man had given the TV set to them, he was a salesman in an appliance store who bragged that a rich customer had given it to him, so why shouldn't he give it to Eric's mom, who couldn't afford such a good TV set otherwise? When his mom was working as a restaurant hostess and was going to marry the owner, Eric ate hot fudge sundaes and drank chocolate shakes. When she worked at a trucking company, the owner of all the trucks told her he was getting a divorce. Eric climbed into the rigs with the rooms full of dials and levers in the sky. Then she started working in an engineer's office. There was no food or fun there, but even he could see the money. He was not supposed to touch anything, but what was there to touch? The tubes full of paper? He and his mom were invited to the engineer's house, where he had 2 horses and a stable and a swimming pool and 2 convertible sports cars. The engineer's family was there, his grown children, his gray-haired parents. They all sat down for a dinner in a waiting room that seemed as bigger than Eric's apartment, with 3 candelabras on the table and a tablecloth and cloth napkins. Eric's mom took him aside to tell him to be well-mannered at the table and polite to everyone. Eric hadn't said anything. He never spoke anyway, so how could he have said anything wrong? She leaned into his ear and said that she wanted them to know that he spoke English. That whole dinner, he was silent, chewing quietly, taking the smallest bites, because he didn't want them to think that he liked their food. When she got upset about days like that, she told Eric that she wished they could just go back home. She was tired of worrying. Back, for Eric, meant mostly the stories he'd heard from her, which never sounded so good to him. She had to share a room with her brothers and sisters. They didn't have toilets. They didn't have electricity. Sometimes they didn't have enough food. He saw this Mexico as if it were a backdrop of a movie on afternoon TV, where children walked around barefoot in the dirt or on broken sidewalks, and small men wore wide-brimmed straw hats and baggy white shirts and pants. The women went to church all the time and prayed to alcove saints, and heads down, fearful, counted rosary beads. There were rocks everywhere, and scorpions and tarantulas and rattlesnakes and vultures, and no trees and not much water, and skinny dogs and donkeys and ugly bad guys with guns and bullet vests who rode laughing into town to drink and shoot off their pistols and rifles, driving their horses all over like dirt bikes on desert dunes. When they spoke English, they had stupid accents. His mom didn't have an accent like theirs. It didn't make sense to him that Mexico could only be like that, but what if it were close? He lived on paved, lighted city streets, and a bicycle ride away were the Asian drugstore and the Armenian grocery store, and the corner where black Cubans drank coffee and talked Dodgers baseball. When he was in bed, where he sometimes prayed, he thanked God for his mom, who he loved, and he apologized for not talking to her, or to anyone really, except his friend Albert. And he apologized for never going to church and for for her never going to church and for his never taking Holy Communion as Albert did, though only to God would he admit that he wanted to, only because Albert did. He prayed for good to come for his mom and for him, since God was like magic and happiness might come the way of early morning in the trees and bushes full of sparrows next to his open window, louder and louder when he listened hard, eyes closed. The engineer wouldn't have mattered if Eric hadn't told Albert that he was his dad. Albert had just moved into the apartment next door and lived with his mother and father, and since Albert's mother already didn't like Eric's mom, Eric told him that his new dad was an engineer. Eric actually believed it too, and thought that he might even get his own horse. When that didn't happen, and his mom was lying in her bed in the middle of the day, blowing her nose because she didn't even have a job anymore, that was when Roque came around again. Roque was nobody, or he was everybody. Let me do that again. Roque was nobody, and he was anybody. He wasn't special, he wasn't not. He tried to speak English to Eric, thinking that was the reason Eric didn't say anything when he was there. And Eric had to tell Albert that Roque was his uncle, because the engineer was supposed to be his new dad any minute. Uncle Rock, Eric said, his mom's brother, he told Albert. Roque worked at night and was around during the day, and one day he offered Eric and Albert a ride. When his mom got into the car, she scooted all the way over to Roque on the bench seat, who was supposed to be her brother, Eric's Uncle Rock. Albert didn't say anything, but he saw what had happened, and that was it for Eric. Albert had parents, grandparents, and a mother and a sister, and he'd hang out only when one of his cousins wasn't coming by. Eric didn't need a friend like him. What if she married Roque? His mom asked him one day soon afterward. She told Eric that they would move away from their apartment in the Silver Lake to a better neighborhood. He did want to move, but he wished it wasn't because of Uncle Rock. It wasn't just because Roque didn't have a swimming pool or horses or a big ranch house. There wasn't much to criticize, except that he was always too willing and nice, too considerate, too generous. He wore nothing flashy or expensive, just ordinary clothes that were cleaned and ironed and shoes that he kept shined. He combed and parted his hair neatly. He didn't have a buzz cut like the men who didn't like kids. He moved slow. He talked slow, as quiet as night. He only ever said yes to Eric's mom. How could she not like him for that? He loved her so much, anybody could see his pride when he was with her. He signed checks and he gave her cash. He knocked on the door carrying cans and fruit and meat. He was there when she asked, gone when she asked, back whenever, grateful. He took her out to restaurants on Sunset Boulevard, to the movies in Hollywood, or on drives to the beach in rich Santa Monica. Roque knew that Eric loved baseball. Did Roque like baseball? It was doubtful that he cared even a little bit. He didn't listen to the games on the radio or TV, and he never looked at the newspaper. He loved boxing, though. He knew the names of the Mexican fighters as if they lived here, as if they were Dodger players like Steve Yeager and Dusty Baker, Kenny Landauer and Mike Marshall, Pedro Guerrero. Roque did know about Fernando Valenzuela. Everybody did, even his mom, which is why she agreed to let Roque take him to a game. What Mexican didn't love Fernando? Dodger Stadium was close to their apartment. He'd been there once with Albert and his family, well, outside it, on a nearby hill, to see the fireworks for 4th of July. His mom decided that all three of them could go on a Saturday afternoon, since Saturday night, Eric figured, she might want to go somewhere else, even with somebody else. Roque, of course, didn't know who the Phillies were. He knew nothing about the strikeouts by Steve Carlton or the home runs by Mike Schmidt. He'd never heard of Pete Rose. It wasn't that Eric knew very much either, but there was nothing that Roque could talk to him about, even if they were to talk. If Eric showed his excitement when they drove up to Dodger Stadium and parked, his mom and Roque didn't really notice it. They sat in the bleachers, and for him, the green of the field was a magic light. The stadium decks surrounding them seemed as far away as Rome. His body was somewhere it had never been before. The fifth inning? That's how late they were. Or were they right on time? Because they weren't even sure they were sitting in the right seats yet when he heard the crack of the bat, the crowd around them rising as it came at them. Eric saw the ball. He had to stand and move and stretch his arms and want the ball until it hit his bare hands and stayed there. Everybody saw him catch it with no bobble. He felt all the eyes and voices around him as if they were every set of eyes and every voice in the stadium. His mom was saying something and Roque too, and then finally it was just him and that ball in his stinging hands. He wasn't even sure if it had been hit by Pete Guerrero. He thought for sure it had been, but he didn't ask. He didn't watch the game then. He couldn't. He didn't care who won. He stared at his official National League ball, reimagining what had happened. He ate a hot dog and drank a soda, and he sucked the salted peanuts in the wooden spoon from his chocolate malt ice cream. He rubbed the bumpy seams of his home run ball. Game over, they were the last to leave. People were hanging around, not going straight to their cars. Roque didn't want to leave. He didn't want it to end so quickly, Eric thought, while he still had her with him. Then one of the Phillies came out the stadium door and people swarmed, boys mostly, but also men and some women and girls, and they got autographs before the players climbed into the team's bus. Joe Morgan, they said. Then Gary Maddox appeared. Eric clutched the ball, but he didn't have a pin. He just watched, his back to the gray bus the Phillies were getting into. Then a window slid open. "Hey, big guy," a voice said. Eric really wasn't sure. "Give me the ball, la pelota," the face in the bus said. "I'll have it signed, comprendes? Échalo. Just toss it to me." Eric obeyed. He tossed the ball to the hand that was reaching out. The window closed. The ball was gone a while, so long that his mom came up to him, worried that he'd lost it. The window slid open again and the voice spoke to her. "We got the ball, Mom. It's not lost, just a few more." When the window opened once more, this time the ball was there. "Catch!" There were all kinds of signatures on it, though none he could really recognize except Joe Morgan and Pete Rose. Then the voice offered more, and the hand threw something at him. "For your mom, okay? Comprendes?" Eric stared at the asphalt lot where the object lay as if he'd never seen a folded up piece of paper before. "Para tu mamá, bueno?" He picked it up. He started to walk over to his mom and Roque, who were so busy talking they didn't notice anything. Then he stopped. He opened the note himself. No one said he couldn't read it. It read, "I'd like to get to know you. You are muy linda, very beautiful and sexy. I don't speak Spanish very good. Maybe you speak better English, pero no importa. Would you come by tonight and let me buy you a drink?" There was a phone number and a hotel room number. A name, too. A name that came to him the way that that home run had. Eric couldn't hear. He could see only his mom ahead of him. She was talking to Roque. Roque was talking to her. Roque was the proudest man, full of joy because he was with her. It wasn't his fault he wasn't an engineer. Now Eric could hear again. Like sparrows hunting seed, boys gathered around the bus, calling out, while the voice in the bus was yelling at him, "Hey, big guy, give it to her." Eric had the ball in one hand and the note in the other. By the time he reached his mom and Roque, the note was somewhere on the asphalt parking lot. "Look," he said in a full voice, "they all signed my ball."
So, Dago, we're supposed to be talking about surviving the American dream. So, that presumes that we signed on in some way, and that we've overcome it in somehow, in spite of the troubles. So, tell me, did you identify with the American dream, and what were those dreams that you had?
Well, let me just, without going into it yet, but I just came off Tucson. I went to Tucson last week with the Libro Traficantes because I had 2 books banned in Arizona. And so we decided to smuggle books into Arizona. And so I don't know what that is.
You should explain a little what you're talking about.
Well, I'll go back to that.
All right.
I just, as a backdrop of where I am now, but I have to say, you know, when I came up, I don't know that I called it the American dream, but my mother and most of her family was from Mexico, and my father happened to be, was Anglo. He was the boss of this industrial laundry, and that's where he met my mother. He grew up in East Los Angeles, spoke Spanish. Long story there. But in some sense, and when I was 13, actually I was 12, but I started working when my 13th year of life, he gave me a job. And so a combination of both my mother and relatives that would come from Mexico to visit us, and where my father, he was a floor super. And, you know, I'd say like 3/4 of the people there were Spanish speaking illegally there, undocumented. And my father was very cool with all that, didn't care in the slightest. But I always felt wealthy. You know, oddly enough, I felt like the one that had made it. You know, that our family was a big, and this is where everybody wanted to be. And probably in my youth, I had this odd sort of noble pride in, you know, this is where we're going. And, you know, it is something, depending on who you're above.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
You know, you see the world in a light like that.
So when did you figure out you weren't wealthy?
Well, it's funny. I started dating well. My mother was dated well at some point. And then I did. And then I started seeing what rich people, you know, I would like figure out what richer places were, and I would date those kind of girls. And I started saying, well, guy, they actually have shit that I never, yeah. So I started seeing that things were a lot different. I would get pulled over. Things would happen when you would go visit them. Police would ask you what we were doing there. All kinds of things changed.
Now, with parents who were from different cultural and racial groups, where was your identification?
Oh, I had no problem with that. I didn't know. I mean, okay, so on the one hand, I just said that, and let me delete. I think anybody that's a writer This is what I think. Excuse it if I think we always think we're a culture of one. And so even among my own friends, which were always mixed, my other culture was, which of a very dominant culture, was from broken homes. And all my friends, there was, everybody had to come from a single-parent home or I couldn't hang out with them. Both, on the one hand, I couldn't hang out with them because usually a good, stable home wouldn't allow a kid like me in. And then, two, it's just, I didn't realize it, but I look back and say, I always felt comfortable when I could go visit somebody that, usually only lived with a mom. There was one guy who he had a dad because his mom had died. But I realized that was a big culture that I had. And then I always knew that I was the guy that came, that my mother was this Mexican woman. That was a big deal.
You said writers think of ourselves as cultures of one. When did you realize you were a writer?
No, that's something else. I came to it late. And it wasn't me being a writer, but I was always odd. I always felt odd, whether I was odd. I'm not odd, right? I felt odd. And but the writing thing, I actually didn't feel like I was odd as a writer. I thought I was going to join the American mainstream and thought that I could be like, Jack Kerouac, who was French-Canadian. He wrote America. I feel like I can tell you about America. My stories are all about Americans. They happen to be now, I know, Chicanos and Mexican Americans, but I did not feel like we were not part of the American mainstream in terms of everybody, if half the people are Mexican American and they were speaking English and watching the same TV and listening to music and we were cruising the same boulevards, how did I not think I was just as American as everybody else? It wasn't until I started publishing that I realized that I wasn't being treated that way. That was a surprise, I have to say. That was a big surprise.
To realize that the outside world saw you as not American.
Right. I even see where my books are placed now. It's always like, really?
Latino literature?
Yeah, just some. I remember I had one book, it was Woodcuts of Women, and it was popular for me. It was a good-selling book, and I'd given this good reading in an Austin bookstore, book people, in fact. And, we're talking 100 people showed up. And 3 weeks later, I went back into the bookstore, and they had put the book in the Latin American section. And I guess they didn't know what the name was, and they put it in the lesbian Latin American.
All right.
It was really, they were really up high.
You're one of my people now.
Yeah, they were really up high, and I thought, well, geez, you had to be like a 6-foot lesbian to find my book. It was not in the lit section. It was totally, it was just not there anymore. And so you tell me why that happens.
That's incredible. It's interesting because I had a completely different experience growing up. We knew we were different, and we struggled to remain different. As my parents were Cuban refugees who imagined always going back. The whole going back thing was a total part of the daily discourse. It wasn't, in fact, at all unusual for my dad, especially, to begin any particular conversation by saying, well, when we go back, and then it would be any one of a number of things like, we can make picadillo with ground up turkey instead of steak. Or, you'll really have to polish your Spanish or whatever. It would be really quotidian things, but that would take place in a slightly altered fashion when we went back. And I think we had a more sort of defensive posture, although it was interesting because my dad was light-skinned and had light eyes and a full head of hair. In Michigan City, he looked like, where I grew up, Michigan City, Indiana, he looked like pretty much anybody except for the fact that he wore a beret. And what was curious to me was that he had a refusal to think that when people treated him badly, that it was because he was Latin American. And so he would say, these people are ignorant and they're afraid of foreigners. So his whole thing was like, Americans don't accept us, but I feel kind of sorry for them. What was your reaction?
Yeah, mine was interesting. It's different. My mother was an extremely proud Mexicana. But, sort of like, actually I think like some things trump other things. Mm-hmm. Like gayness trumps ethnicity often, right? Or am I wrong? Well, anyway, we won't go there.
I don't know.
Beauty.
It depends.
She was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that meant everybody didn't care.
Right.
And
yeah, so beauty trumps everything.
It trumps everything. We'd do stuff, we'd go to Hollywood Park, and suddenly we'd get in these great places, just walk in. And I loved all that shit. I loved it. I loved to go to the racetrack, and I loved getting, at the time it was Roy Rogers, and all these funny drinks, all these she would get drunk, and I would get these great drinks.
Not that you got drunk.
Yeah, those kind of drinks, the kid drinks. And see horses, and so all that, but she could move around. Now, my father, when I got to know him, I've learned stories later. I wasn't close to my father, so I don't really know a lot. But he, I knew when they dated, there would be trouble. It was L.A. in the time when no Mexicans were allowed. He would say, no, when I did your mother, we could go anywhere. But as soon as her brother would come along, my mother was sort of lighter. He was dark. Suddenly they had shit, and they had trouble. And so I hear that, and he would tell me things, and I didn't know him well, so the few things he would say would stick in some weird way. He would say, don't ever tell people you're Mexican. He'd say, tell them you're Spanish.
Oh, God, yeah, that old kind.
And I just didn't know what to make of that. And I didn't like it. I never did it until when I did, I said, no, I'm Mexican. What do you mean? It just didn't, I didn't know what that meant. But that is where his head was. And
we were supposed to say we were Spanish only when people didn't know where Cuba was.
Oh.
Yeah, we would say Cuban, and then they would say, where? What? Well, we're Spanish. That would end it. Yeah. We were never Latino. We were, that was not an identification that, we wanted to go towards.
Well, where I grew up, Mexican itself, it was a bad word. I mean, it was actually kind of a slur.
So what happened when you realized that in spite of everything you experienced and in spite of everything you thought, you were Mexican?
Well, in that sense, I got in fights when I was younger. And I would get in fights. And I wasn't, I was not small, so I could fight. And I would mostly win. So people didn't say shit to me, and if they did, they ran. And so I didn't have a lot of those. I mean, the fights that I can't win when you get older are the ones that aren't like when you're a kid.
Right.
Because those I could deal with. But
so you could do the violent thing. You just couldn't.
I was a good athlete, and I could do things. I worked. I mean, nobody really. I would just give them shit right back.
Right.
So in that respect, I didn't have that trouble. And then as I look back at it now, particularly now since I'm feeble, now an 8-year-old can take me out, and it's like, whoa, this is scary. I don't know what this means. Somebody said, well, that's how it is for us all the time, anyway. It's different. I don't know what it is, and what it was then was just easier. Oh, the subtle things with work, and as a writer, it's like you can't really, you have to be polite in ways because people with power don't
take kindly.
They don't do it in your face, and it doesn't work the same way. It's a much more difficult, yes.
Who were you reading? What Latin Americans were you reading?
God, that's funny.
What Latino writers were you reading? Anybody?
Well, I actually have backed off. It's funny. Somebody else said that to me. I think, God, I've been on a Dostoevsky binge. I don't know what that is. I've been on Dostoevsky, and of course, Bolaño. who didn't do the
Right, but those are recent. When you were growing up, what were you reading?
Oh, as a kid who read, I was lucky in the day. Teatro Campesino was in.
Because there was a time of tremendously fervent Mexican American and Chicano cultural activity.
Well, Teatro Campesino when I was in college was big. There weren't when I. Maybe you're not realizing I'm an old sucker.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah. But we're talking about in the 70s. There were no Chicanos. It was real.
Well, you had poets like Alurista.
Barely.
Yeah.
Barely. And, I mean, they were not well known. And in fact, the Chicano movement, when it started, it seemed like it was rural. Cesar Chavez, you know, I went to pachangas with Cesar Chavez. I went to the parties. And, but I didn't feel like a lot of it because it was all about farmers. And I'm from the city, and I didn't know what broccoli. I didn't know where broccoli grew. I had no idea. I thought it was from Safeway or something, you know. And things like that made it. But years later, you start to understand that was the early days of the movement. But Luis Valdez came quite a few times. Not that I knew him,
right?
But I would see the Teatro Campesino. That stuff just changed my life. And then, frankly, I remember my girlfriend, who became my wife. She taught in Crystal City, Texas, which is very famous in the history of Chicano, the annals of Chicanismo. It was where it really sort of, a lot of people say it began. If you look back in that city, most of the big names in the Chicano history come from Crystal City, and she was from Eagle Pass. And she gave me a book by Rolando Hinojosa.
Oh, God.
Estampas del Valle. I'd never heard of him. Mm-hmm. And she said, you should read this. And I remember thinking, oh, my God, it's just so ordinary, but it's about people from, and I thought, oh, I don't think I've ever read that before. I'd never seen people, ordinary people that were bankers and played baseball, that spoke Spanish and English, actually represented in lit. And that did actually...
In stories about ordinary life.
Ordinary life, utterly ordinary.
Utterly ordinary, yeah. You really have to sort of hook into them, too.
It changed my life. That changed my life right there. That altered everything for me. I was reading Camus and all the Europeans. I did not read Americans. I read
You didn't read Americans?
I didn't read Americans. Well, I didn't study English in college. That was where smart kids went to.
What did you study?
Philosophy.
Oh, right.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, let me explain that.
Please.
When I started, if you read Plato, you read a page, right? I could read really slow. And I could read Plato, but you give me Faulkner, I had to look up so many words in Melville, like, what the? So, Plato, you read a page and you were successful. And so I stayed with philosophy. It was much easier to read that stuff.
Now, when did you start to write? How old were you? Where were you in your, trajectory?
Like, not young. I didn't start writing until
So it was post-college?
Oh, absolutely. Like within the first year after college, I wrote a really horrible short story. So
wait a minute. You have a degree in philosophy, and you get out of college. What are you doing? What are you working at?
That was kind of the issue. There weren't a lot of philosophy, everybody. And it turned out that was like troublemaker. I had troublemaker issues. I did do that. No, I started banging nails is what I did.
So you work in construction,
carpentry?
Yeah,
I went right into construction work.
Okay.
And that's when I started taking notes, and I was in a notebook. I thought I would be like a half-breed Hegel. That was my goal.
I see. So tell us about that story, that first story.
Oh, no, I got rid of that. It was just awful.
But it wasn't so awful. You went on and wrote something else.
Well, it was not what it was a drug. It was like, the typical undergrad story that actually more like an undergrad at University of Arizona, where everybody's either drunk or stoned or getting laid, and they think that was like the first time in history that has ever happened, and they write and they write those stories. They'd see me come and say, "Oh, this guy will love this," and that was kind of my first story. It was about a guy getting pretty high. It was pretty stupid, really.
But you kept at it. And then somewhere along the line, you had one that got published.
Yeah, no, things changed. I was working on a novel. I thought it was a stupid novel, too, but I still have that.
Oh, you do?
It's real bad.
I can see the posthumous edition.
Actually, it's about a young Chicano who works at a paper. He's a paper cutter, and
he cuts big swaths of paper.
Yeah, he has two buttons. It goes, you size it. Anyway, his boss is this creepy white guy. He beats his shit out of him. Beats him so bad that he has to run. He picks up a black dude hitchhiking, and they go to a hippie place. They start a riot after he meets his girl. It's so stupid. It's just truly embarrassing. It really is. I got an agent that read it, and she wrote, "Some of this is very good. Some of this is truly awful." And I remember writing her and saying, "Well, couldn't we just worry about
the really good parts?
I'll reduce the truly awful the next book." They didn't work that way.
So what was your first success, Dago?
My first success, I started publishing. Well, I was working a construction job in El Paso. It was it turned out to be my first high-rise. I didn't know that. It was a 3-story add-on at the University of Texas, El Paso. It was at the museum. And I was writing this stupid novel. I was close to 200 pages into it.
That's quite a ways.
Yeah, no, I finished. And across the street, I took it across the street. Long story short, Raymond Carver was there. But he wasn't Raymond Carver yet. He was just becoming Raymond Carver.
He was just Ray Carver.
Well, he'd published his first book was Will You Please Be Quiet, Please?
Right.
And he was there. I don't know. He hadn't become the deity that he became. And so he was there, and he was writing stories, and they said he was working class. And I had been working in the working class for quite a few years, and even for a couple, 2-3 years then as a carpenter. I thought, oh, look, he's working class. And I read them, and I thought, hey, working class, to me, there's no jobs. And so I started writing what I thought were working class stories. That's what propelled me to do that. But they all had Mexicans in them, and as soon as you have Mexicans...
Yeah, they become Mexican stories.
Yeah, it's not working class anymore.
Yeah. Why is that? Why does race trump class?
You have to tell me. I think it's because Mexicans aren't part of America, and therefore it's like cheap. You don't have to have labor laws and all those things drop away. I don't know, You tell me.
When did you feel that you had, become a writer? When did you feel like that was an identity you could embrace, that you said, okay, this is who I am?
My story is really great. I have a really wonderful American story, actually. I mean, in this sense,
I knew we'd get back to that.
The best part of America. I had gotten rejected. I'd published quite a bit. I had published in real good literary magazines. I mean, not like the New Yorker or anything like that, but, the 3-penny Review published me regularly. And, I'd published maybe 30, 35 short stories, but could not get a book. And nobody would publish anything. And I only wanted New York. I kept saying I wanted to be published by Harper and Row, which didn't exist. But that's where Herman Melville published. And I just thought, why can't I publish like at Harper and Row like them? Aren't I even mediocre enough to be I don't need to be the best. I had a letter querying would I like to publish for them. I actually thought that wasn't my dream. I didn't have a teacher job. I didn't need tenure. It meant nothing. To get a book published wasn't the point. The point was to get the book published in New York, like writers.
By a big, big press.
Yeah, it's just that's what writers did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, I didn't need one of those jobs. So I gave up, and I decided, in my mind, I thought I was giving my work to the archives. I just, here, let you have a novel then. I finished a novel. I had 2 collections of stories. Nobody interested. I thought, well, you just deal with it. Reality is nobody. So I sent it to New Mexico. Not a week later, they were just like excited for 1 collection of stories. And I thought, well, that was stupid. I should just give it to them. And I gave them all my stories. We cut it back. That book became The Magic of Blood. And in a lot of ways, it was my metaphorical suicide. I just sort of jumped off a building and said, the hell with it.
Whatever happens, happens.
And then I suddenly started floating. I landed in D.C. and New York, places I'd never been. Didn't even think didn't occur to me to go. And I ended up with Morgan, everything started happening. So just, you never know what's going to happen.
With Morgan?
Morgan Anderkin at Crow Press.
Oh, right. Right. And then you've been there ever since. You're a real regular Grove author.
That's one of the great places, because I have to say that, growing up, I read all the Grove books from, Juan Rulfo is published there, and, everybody that I love.
John Retchie is published there.
John Retchie is published there.
Yeah.
Jean Genet is published there.
That's true, right? Yeah.
It was my favorite press, so it was like a dream come true that not only was I going to New York, it was Grove Press was calling.
So, but you were still sort of being pegged at Latino literature, at every turn. At any point did you say, all right, fine, that's what it is?
Yeah, no, I totally embraced it at some point. At some point, early along, it wasn't that I didn't want it, I just wanted bigger.
You wanted more than that?
I just didn't understand why I had to...
Why it had to be that?
Be only that, but at some point I realized it was good for my own community. I didn't realize there were things I didn't realize, I naively didn't know. And also I just enjoyed, I realized, like this thing in Arizona, I'm totally proud of. I'd rather just do that. I understand.
Okay, now back up and explain that so people know what you're talking about. Cause
Arizona, I don't know when they did the law.
I think it was a few months ago.
Several months ago, I'd say 6 months ago, established a law forbidding what they called ethnic studies in the state of Arizona. Now, the only ethnic studies that is going on is Mexican-American studies.
Not Latino, but specifically Mexican-American.
Well, they might even call it Latino, but there aren't.
They were aiming at
the Latino in the West is always Mexican American.
No, but they were very specifically aiming at the Mexican American.
Yeah, there's no question. And in specifically in Tucson, Arizona, they had a very specific program there called Mexican American Studies, and which, if it were not Mexican Americans, would be equivalent of an AP class. They were all AP classes. The list of books they were reading were, generally college level, and they were all kids that were, definitely going to the best schools in the country. So the state of Arizona passed a law, and then the Tucson Independent School District decided, they didn't call it banning, they said they boxed the books up and put them in storage. They don't call that banning.
But to give you an idea of how this went down, when the law came into effect, the principal and the teachers, literally like on the minute, who were behind this, went into the classrooms and literally took the books off the shelves. Like in some of the classrooms, there were classes going on.
Right.
And while the classes were going on, the principals and the other administrators were literally just taking stuff off the wall and putting it in boxes. The idea being that if you want to read these books, they are available through the library or
Amazon.
Or Amazon. Yeah. But some of the book titles are incredibly, frankly, banal. Like Sandra's House on Mango Street is one of the books that was banned. If you can fathom that book being banned, I mean, it's like, I'm sorry, I can barely get through that book because nothing happens, and I like Sandra, but, the idea that this book has something controversial in it is, unreal.
The list is astounding.
The list is unbelievable.
It's just, and it was truly an offense. I think, I stopped and thought, look, you can say garbage to me, but once you start going at my children, okay, that's it. You've gone too far. You got me to deal with now. I'm not going to take that shit. And that's just not going to happen.
So what is it that you guys ended up doing?
Well, we went there, sort of like sort of theater. It's a lot theater, a lot of publicity. I mean, my friend Tony Diaz from Houston, he was incredible. I couldn't believe it was just his, to give him a mic and the guy is just...
Tony Diaz of the Aztec Love God?
Yeah, Aztec Love God, man.
Yeah.
And he does Nuestra Palabra in
Absolutely.
Houston. Does a great thing in Houston, and he decided to take this up. He got a lot of Latino organizations, gave money, rented a bus, and went on a bus tour, a publicity bus tour from Houston to San Antonio, from San Antonio to Chuco, El Paso, and then to Mesilla, then to Albuquerque, and from Albuquerque to Tucson. Readings and just gathering.
From the banned books.
Yeah, we had the banned books. He made underground libraries. He called them wet books. We were smuggling them. And he called himself a libro traficante. He was el libro traficante. And, it was extraordinarily fun. I have to say it was like absolutely great and powerful, and it isn't done. I think these sort of things are good because I think it's so ridiculous people don't realize what power grabs some of these people are into. They just could not be more offensive. Like, they might as well say, we hate Mexicans, and I don't care who you're, where you came from. But I have to say, just for the record, I mean, this immigration issue, I guess I have mixed feelings. And I actually think that I understand that, but if they really want to send everybody back, then I feel bad that they have to go back to Oklahoma and Mississippi and Georgia and all those places. But
Miami.
Yeah, wherever they're going, those people in the Southwest, if they really have to leave, I guess it makes sense. I mean, if they maybe go back to Germany and Switzerland or wherever they're from, Czechoslovakia,
Wales,
whatever they have a problem, they just, whatever that is. It's funny in Arizona, which absolutely everybody there is not from there. It's just funny to hear it in Arizona.
Yeah, no, a native Arizonan is someone who's retired there for 10 years.
Basically, they've been there no more than 10 years.
No more than 10. Yeah, that's pretty typical. When you went back and you did this tour with Tony, obviously you were probably reading from a whole lot of Mexican American and Chicano classics, probably stuff you hadn't looked at in a long time.
I hadn't. It's true.
Yeah. What did you think when you went through it, when you read it again this time around?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, what I see is just a lot of young people experiencing what I did coming up. I'm past that. Mm-hmm. I mean, they don't know who Bolaño is. They don't read that. They don't. I tried teaching them about Juan Rulfo or things like that. I want to talk about Dostoevsky and say he's the best Chicano I know. And you should read him. And but it's not unusual to start. I mean, most of the kids that you grew up, in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, you can go to the Rio Grande Valley and it'll be 99% Mexican American. And they have no idea that their culture has a history. And the only place, I mean, it would be as if the perfect South Africa, it's the perfect South Africa where the blacks are reading the white Afrikaners and not even noticing. And nobody, you know, even the teachers are teaching it and not noticing. And I think they've just sort of provoked the giant finally. It's been something I've been doing. I have a new job in a small town in Texas where we are trying to bring a 6-week curriculum of Mexican-American lit into the schools. When we hit that 50% of the demographic, it just seems like people should know that tacos and enchiladas actually come from a culture and from people. You know, the way I've been describing it, because the racism is a lot different than it used to be for blacks. I mean, even though Mexicans are the new Negro, you know, the new colored people in this country, it's not quite the same, even though Arizona comes close to using words like nigger for Mexican. I mean, it's whatever they want. It's not quite the same, but the way I think of it is like an optic disease. I don't know if many people know what macular degeneration is. It's where you don't see the center, so you don't see faces.
Oh, right. You see blurs.
And so they see the hands serving them, but they don't see anybody there. And it's sort of the thing that I think I've struggled with.
I don't know that that's unique to us. I mean,
yeah.
I think.
No,
I'm sure that slaves got that a whole lot.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. And I'm not saying I don't think so. I've just been trying to figure out what the heck that is, because you can go and you know, people go to like, you know, El Paso and they're just like surprised. And it's like, what did you think was here? And then they go to bars and things and there's a couple waiters and they feel more comfortable in their world. It's just a strange, and I don't think I was as conscious of it until, you know, I think some of the discussions I realized that I would have in the 1970s are the exact same discussions today, and that just seems impossible that we haven't.
Well, that's happening on a lot of levels. It's not just race. I mean, women have been having discussions these days that feel like, you know, very early 60s, and you know, gay people have been having conversations that seem like, are you kidding me? Are we really talking about that? And you know, the discourse seems to have been sort of turned back anyway.
Well, we are in a strange warp right now. These last couple of years have been pretty extraordinarily new. Yeah. So there is that.
There is that. I want to open up to questions, so I'm going to bring the microphone around as best as I can. If anybody has any questions for Dago.
Or Achi. I mean,
oh, well, whatever. If you have a question for me. I'm not sure this will extend very far, so I'm going to do my best to bring it to you.
Hi, it could be for both of you guys. I was wondering, how much pressure do you feel since you're along in your career to sort of follow the Latino bend for writing? So you had said, for example, I felt like an American. Now, I'm Ecuadorian and half Jewish, and I find that we should talk. And I find when I'm writing stuff or working with editors, I'm either forced to be more Latino. Like, I wrote a story about desplazados, the displaced, and they're like, oh, you should make your whole thing like that. And I'm like, well, are they forcing it? And, you know, I'm not well published and don't have a book and so forth. And if it's happening at that shitty little level, what sort of pressure is coming from New York to be that Latino writer? And I'm just kind of curious your professional ideas about that.
Dago, you want to take that?
Well, I'll do in New York, I don't think in the offices they know what you just said. They really don't know. That is how naive they are. I remember the first time I went to New York, which wasn't that long ago, and I don't think I realized, you know, you go on the streets, I love New York, and I remember not realizing, I'm like, I'd always say, you know, who cares? I grew up in LA, who needs New York? And I remember going there and going, guess I got that wrong. And the streets were so interesting. Everybody, all kinds of people from everywhere. It was my LA, what things I liked. And then I remember saying, I want to go in the offices. And then you go up an elevator. And then suddenly it was like college, at least like, oh, here we are again having this discussion. And, there are not Latino editors. And they still do not understand what you just said. And our country isn't. We're not quite there yet. I think time demographically will change this. People think Mexico itself is just one big lump of one ethnicity, and it's a little more complicated than that, as most places really are. This mixing is not unique to us, but they think so. They think that, and it's just because we're not there yet. In New York, since it does dominate, they don't really know a lot. They know what's in their neighborhood, but they don't know a lot.
It feels like it's a lot of the same cycling through of novels about middle-class epiphanies, middle-class epiphanies. You have an entire generation of mixed kids, whether working class or middle class, that are just completely benign somewhere else in the country. It happens in Chicago. I don't know how much in LA, but...
No, Chicago. I love Chicago because of the mix. It's absolutely true.
But, I think sometimes that some of the expectations of how we should write comes from unexpected places. My very first published story was in a feminist magazine. A pretty groovy, feminist magazine. I'm not going to get into which one it was. And the main character was a little girl, and I had named her Nina, Nina. And I got a note from the editor from this feminist magazine telling me that the only editing change they wanted to make was on the name. And I was completely confused as to what the deal was, and they didn't want to use it because, I'm not making this up, it sounded Italian, and they wanted, because my name was so odd and not immediately ethnically identifiable, they wanted to make sure that people understood that this was a Latina girl. To me, the story didn't depend on ethnicity at all. I mean, it had a very particular situation that has to do with, Cubans and boats and all this other stuff, but it could be easily applied to any number of other peoples. Anyway, I was, of course, so desperate and happy to have publication that I said, what the hell, it's just one vowel, And so I went ahead and made the change. I wouldn't make that change now. In fact, after Days of Awe, I had that was a 2-book contract with Random House, and I wrote Ruins, and Random House was very upset with the ending of Ruins. The editor, my original editor was wonderful at Random House. It was Leona Nepler, and she was amazing, and she was incredibly supportive. She was real old school. She was pretty great. But the new editor was like 12 years old, and she had a specialty in Danish literature, and that I'm not making up. And which I thought was interesting, considering what her complaint was about Ruins. Ruins is a story about the special period in Cuba, which is like the worst, most nihilistic period in the island's history. It's like everything bad happened in the special period. And her thing was that the ending was too sad for an American audience. And she really thought that the ending needed an optimistic note. Well, what was incredible to me was that, I was like, I'm not sure how I can possibly pull that off. I mean, given this is like a Holocaust novel, not comparing Cuba and the Holocaust, but, it's a little, you can't really make a happy story out of this. And she said, oh, but you can. You can put I don't need you to make it happy, I just need you to make it optimistic. You can put your character, you can put Usnavi on a boat to Miami. And that will indicate to that will indicate to the American reader that there is hope. And I was like, I'm sorry, did you read the other 235 pages before? Because I'm pretty sure that character, the last thing he could do is get on a boat. So we tugged back and forth. We tugged back and forth for years, where they were basically, we own the book, changed the ending, and I was like, I hope you enjoy the book. And we kind of went back and forth. Finally, they released it, and they released it under very wonderful terms. It was really surprising. And of course, Kashik accepted it with the ending that I wrote and the ending that I wanted. But, I used to care a lot more about, the right sort of ending for my people. Now, I just care about the right ending for me. That is all I care about. The book that I'm writing now has no explicit anything. There's the narrator has no sex, has no age, has no name, has no color, has nothing. To a certain extent, I'm working something out, and I realize that it's a story really about point of view, not about anything else. But I've just come to this position where I just don't care about satisfying anyone but me first. Me first. And if you identify and you like what I'm doing, great. And if you don't, you can buy somebody else. I stole that from Romney. I don't know if you know that. He's been saying that lately. It's like, if you want free contraceptives, vote for the other guy. If you want equality, vote for the other guy.
That's funny.
Anybody else have a question? Well, is there a hand in the back? Okay.
I just barely started reading Chicano literature, and I just have a very basic question. What inspires you? Like, deep down, like, what really inspires you, like, to write, to continue writing?
I don't know, Achi, you want this one?
I'll follow you.
Well, I guess I think it's like a sickness. It's like something that happens to you that, I don't know about you, but what happened to me, I would lose jobs. And I don't think it's always good that you're like daydreaming, thinking, God, I want to... And then suddenly says, hey, you're fired. And, I'm thinking about a story I could have sold for $100 at the tops. And so it is kind of a sickness. I don't know that... I started reading. I remember, I don't remember why it happened. I joke but did I get electroshock and I don't remember? And then I suddenly after I started reading, I don't know. Because I didn't come up, and there are no books in my house. Actually, that's untrue. There were a couple books my mother had. A couple meaning like the top 3. But I discovered that she only read the dirty parts. So, and then she also used to stick $20 bills in them. And, I once in a while would borrow them because I figured she wouldn't remember that she stuck them in there. But, yeah, I don't know where it comes from. I honestly don't think, I don't think there is it isn't like it's, sort of like sports or something. You have the urge, you want to do that. You want to go run the mile. Who in the world would want to do that?
There were books at my house because both my parents were teachers, and they both really believed in the value of education, and so there were books. But there were never any books that I was particularly interested in, with the single exception of José Martí and the poetry of José Martí, which was deceptively simple and inviting, and you got sucked into it, and before you knew it, you started out with something silly like, Los Zapaticos de Rosa, and before you knew it, you were reading about, capitalism and imperialism and the belly of the beast, and you're like, how the hell did that happen? And so, I was drawn to that. But I think what the connection for me was really in what is valued in Cuban culture and a lot of Caribbean culture is simply storytelling. It's sitting around on the stoop, everybody's got a better story. And, you know, Cubans are notorious for being great liars and, you know, being really hyperbolic. And so the stories became very, very sort of fantastic. Everybody, you know, there's that whole thing about how a Cuban never takes you to a good restaurant. They take you to the best restaurant in the world, you know. and so, you know, my reaction to that was like, all right, let's try to find the truth of this. You know, you didn't really kill 36 people on your way out of Cuba, you know. I mean, my uncle had some insane story about how he couldn't go back to Cuba because on the way out of Cuba, not only had he left in a little boat with one oar, but but he had somehow managed to kill a Coast Guard with this one oar, and the other Coast Guard had actually said, you know, while my uncle is rowing away, the other Coast Guard yelled out after him, "Carlos Obejas, I know who you are." I mean, that is an actual family story. Does that make sense to you? I mean, I'm sitting there going, okay, this never happened, you know. But they would just sit around and try to top each other. So that was kind of fun to listen to, and to get that much attention was interesting. I realized, though, that what actually provokes a story is not so much the desire to be in that spotlight, but it's something much smaller. You know, it's a conversation that you hear at work, or an image that comes to you. You don't know why, you don't understand it. It's, you know, it sounds hokey when you hear writers talk about how their characters come to them, or, you know, they hear a particular line and then they realize, okay, that's the beginning of something. But it is just that simple. It really, you're either hooked in or you're not, and you either work it once you take that little gift. I mean, the stories rarely come whole. You know, they're like a little arrow that says this way, and then you have to figure out whether you're going to go or not, and you have to make the decision to go and then to work it. But for me anyway, and for most writers I know, that they're just a little thing that comes and says this way.
Just two quick additions to that. That's exactly right, the storytelling. But I think there's something that happens, you know, a lot of it's like political activism, but the odd part, I mean, it's like you want to say, yes, me, us. But the odd thing is, you don't jump in front of people, you go hide. You go, when I really want to say the most, it's when I want and need to be alone the most. It's totally odd to care so much about the aloneness, and I think I love that more than anything. When I do this sort of thing, it's much harder to be public. I really don't. I mean, this comes with the territory now, doing these public readings and things like that. And it took me a long time to think that it had anything to do with the thing I wanted to do, right, which was to capture sentences and care about how, you know, sort of like putting them up in mosaics, you know, art, and worrying about every word. That was the thing that is unique about it. But the storytelling is the thing that need, the reading, all that.
Sometimes other books.
Oh, absolutely, other books.
You know, kick you out and make
absolutely.
you... Yeah.
You don't get to be a writer unless you love books.
Yeah, you have to love it.
I absolutely fell in love with books at the point that is what happened. I started reading like a maniac.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so very much for sharing your evening with us.